London in the late 1970s was a city of hard edges, long shadows, and bitter cold. It was a metropolis caught in the grip of the winter of discontent, a time when rubbish piled up on the streets, strikes paralyzed the economy, and a pervasive sense of lawlessness seeped into the cracks of the pavement. The East End, in particular, was a kingdom unto itself. It was a world of Victorian brickwork and post-war concrete, a labyrinth where the police often feared to tread, and where justice was not dispensed by a judge in a wig, but by men with scarred knuckles and reputations that carried more weight than a badge. In this concrete jungle, there were predators, there were prey, and then, standing alone at the very top of the food chain, there was Lenny McLean. To the boxing world, he was an unlicensed phenomenon. To the criminal underworld that moved in the shadows of the pubs and clubs, he was simply the Guv'nor. Lenny McLean was not merely a tough guy, he was a physiological and psychological anomaly. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing 20 stone of granite-hard muscle, he moved with a terrifying grace that belied his immense bulk. He was a man who could clear a pub filled with brawling dockworkers in under 60 seconds, sweeping them aside like children. He was the enforcer that the most notorious gangsters in Britain, the Crays, the Richardsons, the heavy firms from South London, stepped aside for. But his reputation wasn't just built on his size, it was built on a distinct and brutal philosophy. Lenny despised bullies, and he held a particular, venomous hatred for weapons. In his mind, a man who needed a knife or a gun to settle an argument was a coward who couldn't handle his business with his hands. To bring a weapon into Lenny's orbit was not just a threat, it was a personal insult. And as one unfortunate thug would find out on a cold night in East London, it was also a catastrophic error of judgment that would end with a sound that haunted witnesses for years, the sound of a human bone snapping like a dry twig in a winter forest. To understand the weight of the moment when the knife was pulled, one must first understand the man standing in its path. Lenny McLean was forged in the fires of a Dickensian nightmare. His childhood in Hoxton was defined by brutal, systematic abuse at the hands of his stepfather, a trauma that calcified his heart and turned his body into a weapon of survival. He learned early on that the world was a hostile, predatory place, and the only way to navigate it was to be the biggest, scariest monster in the dark. By the time he was an adult, he had harnessed that rage. He didn't just fight, he dismantled opponents. He understood the mechanics of violence with the precision of a surgeon. He knew exactly how much pressure it took to dislocate a shoulder, exactly where to strike to shut off the lights, and exactly how much fear he needed to project to win a fight before a punch was even thrown. The incident in question took place in the smoky, claustrophobic confines of a popular East End drinking den. The venue was typical of the era: sticky carpets that smelled of stale beer, dim amber lighting that hid the stains on the walls, clouds of cigarette smoke hanging low over the tables like a fog, and a clientele that consisted of villains, wide boys, market traders, and hard men looking for trouble. Lenny was there not as a punter, but as the security. In those days, security didn't mean checking IDs or wearing a high-visibility vest. It meant maintaining order in a room full of people who solved arguments with their fists. Lenny was the ultimate deterrent. Usually, just his presence at the door, a mountain of a man in a sheepskin coat, was enough to make trouble turn around and walk away. But alcohol has a way of inflating egos and erasing common sense. The antagonist of this story was a man whose name has largely faded into the footnotes of folklore, a face from South London who was trying to carve out a reputation for himself. He was younger than Lenny, leaner, and filled with the reckless arrogance of someone who had never truly been tested against a superior force. He had come into Lenny's manor with a point to prove. He was loud, abrasive, and looking for a confrontation. He wanted to be the man who humbled the Guv'nor. It was a suicide mission, but vanity is a powerful drug, and he was high on it. The trouble started, as it often did in those days, with a minor infraction. A spilled drink, a disrespectful comment to a barmaid, a refusal to adhere to the house rules. Lenny, ever the professional in his own unique way, approached the man. Witnesses recall that Lenny wasn't shouting. He rarely shouted before a fight. He operated on a frequency of calm, terrifying menace. He asked the man to leave. It was a polite request, or as polite as a 20-stone enforcer gets. "Drink up, son. You're out. Don't make a fuss." It was an offer of amnesty. It was a chance to walk away with dignity. Most men, upon hearing those words from Lenny McLean, would have drank up and left immediately. They would have thanked him for the warning and counted their blessings. But this man was different. He felt the eyes of the room on him. He felt his reputation was at stake. He stood his ground. He puffed out his chest. He made the fatal mistake of thinking that Lenny was just a big, slow target, a lumbering giant that could be toppled with speed and surprise. He didn't realize that Lenny was faster than a lightweight boxer and hit harder than a heavyweight. The atmosphere in the club changed instantly. It was a physical shift in pressure. The jukebox seemed to fade into the background. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The jungle telegraph that operates in such places alerted everyone that something was about to happen. The circle cleared. Lenny stood there, hands open, relaxed, his weight evenly distributed. He was waiting. He was giving the man one last chance to walk away with his limbs intact. Then, it happened. The thug reached into his jacket. The movement was fast, a blur of motion intended to shock and intimidate. When his hand reappeared, it was holding a 6-inch blade. The metal caught the glint of the bar lights, a wicked flash of silver in the gloom. He brandished it, thrusting it forward, putting the steel between him and the giant. He sneered, expecting to see fear. He expected Lenny to back down. He expected the sight of the knife to level the playing field. "Come on then, big man," he reportedly sneered. "Let's see how tough you are now." In a normal situation, facing a knife is a terrifying prospect. It is a lethal variable. One slip, one lucky thrust to an artery, and it's over. But Lenny McLean did not react with fear. He did not flinch. He did not take a step back. Instead, something truly chilling happened. Lenny McLean smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator who has just been given permission to hunt without restriction. It was a cold, wolfish grin that reached his eyes but contained no warmth. In Lenny's code of ethics, a fistfight was a contest of men, a sport of sorts. But a weapon changed the rules of engagement. By pulling that knife, the thug had just signed a waiver. He had forfeited his right to mercy. He had signaled to Lenny that this was no longer a sporting dispute, it was a life-or-death struggle. And that liberated Lenny. It meant he didn't have to hold back. It meant he could unleash the full, unadulterated power of his rage without a shred of guilt. The smile unnerved the attacker more than a scream would have. It froze him for a microsecond. He saw that he hadn't intimidated the giant. He had amused him. He saw a look of supreme, almost pitying confidence. And in that fraction of a second of hesitation, Lenny moved. For a man of his size, Lenny's speed was defying physics. He didn't swat at the knife blindly. He didn't try to block it with his forearm. He stepped inside the arc of the weapon. It was a move of supreme confidence and timing. He closed the distance before the thug's brain could send the signal to stab. Lenny's massive left hand clamped down on the man's wrist. It was like a hydraulic press closing. The grip was absolute. Witnesses described the thug's face turning from arrogance to sudden, sheer panic as he realized he couldn't move his arm. He was trapped. The knife was useless, held frozen in the air by a force he couldn't comprehend. Lenny didn't strike him immediately. He held him there, the knife trembling in the air. He looked the man in the eye, the smile still playing on his lips, wider now. He wanted the man to know, in that intimate moment of violence, exactly who was in charge. He wanted him to feel the powerlessness. He wanted him to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Then came the lesson. Lenny didn't punch him. He didn't headbutt him. He simply rotated his grip. He twisted the man's arm against the natural joint. He used the leverage of his 20-stone frame and the torque of his immense shoulders. He applied pressure with a terrifyingly controlled deliberation. The thug screamed, dropping the knife, but Lenny didn't let go. He continued the motion, pushing the limb past the point of resistance. The sound that followed was described by the barman as resembling a dry branch being stepped on in a quiet forest. A loud, sickening crack echoed through the silent pub. It was the sound of the humerus bone snapping under the strain. Lenny had snapped the man's arm like a twig. It wasn't a fracture. It was a break so complete that the arm hung at an impossible, grotesque angle instantly. The scream that ripped from the man's throat was primal. It was the sound of total defeat. He dropped to his knees, his face drained of color. The fight instantly evaporated, replaced by the overwhelming shock of trauma. The arrogance was gone. The toughness was gone. All that was left was a broken man sobbing on the sticky floor of an East End pub, cradling a limb that was no longer functioning. Lenny released his grip. The man crumpled into a heap. Lenny looked down at him, the smile fading into a look of disdain. He looked at the knife lying on the floor. He kicked it away with the toe of his boot, sliding it under a table as if it were a piece of rubbish. He didn't stomp on the man. He didn't continue the beating. The point had been made. The debt had been paid. Lenny adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his jacket. He looked around the room, meeting the gaze of the stunned onlookers. No one said a word. No one moved. The message had been broadcast loud and clear. You can challenge the Guv'nor, but if you bring a weapon, you will leave broken. Lenny turned back to the bar. He reportedly looked at the barman, who was standing there with his mouth open, holding a towel, and simply said, "Pint of bitter, Dave. And get someone to clean that mess up." He pointed a casual thumb at the man weeping on the floor. Then, he turned his back on the scene and waited for his drink. This incident became one of the cornerstones of the Lenny McLean legend. It circulated through the prisons, the pubs, and the boxing gyms of London. It reinforced the idea that Lenny was not just a fighter, but a force of judgment. It served as a grim warning to the young up-and-comers, who thought a blade made them equal to a bare-knuckle champion. It proved that against a man like Lenny, a knife was just a liability. But beyond the brutality, the story reveals the psychological dominance of Lenny McLean. The smile was the key. That smile was a psychological weapon more potent than the knife. It communicated a total lack of fear. It told the attacker, "You have made a mistake, and now I am going to enjoy correcting it." It shattered the attacker's resolve before a single blow was struck. This was consistent with Lenny's entire career. Whether he was fighting Roy Shaw in the ring or handling trouble on the door, he used fear as a tool. He projected an aura of invincibility. When he smiled at the knife, he was telling the world that he was comfortable in the face of death. He had looked into the abyss of his own childhood and survived. A piece of sharpened metal in the hands of a nervous thug was nothing compared to the demons he lived with every day. The aftermath of the incident was typical for the era. The police were not called immediately. The injured man was dragged out by his friends and taken to a hospital, where they likely concocted a story about a fall down the stairs or a workplace accident. No one snitched. No one pressed charges. To press charges against Lenny McLean would have been a second death sentence, a social suicide in the underworld. The man with the broken arm faded into obscurity, carrying a permanent reminder of the night he tried to be a hero and ended up a victim. For Lenny, it was just another Tuesday. It was just another night on the door. But for those who witnessed it, it was a glimpse into the raw, unpolished reality of the London underworld. It was a demonstration of the hierarchy of violence. There were tough guys, there were killers, and then there was the Guv'nor. The story also highlights Lenny's peculiar code of honor. He could have killed the man. With his strength, he could have easily driven the knife back into the man's chest, or crushed his windpipe. But he chose to break the arm. It was a specific, calculated punishment. It targeted the offending limb, the arm that held the weapon. It was an eye for an eye justice. You use your arm to threaten me, you lose the use of that arm. It was brutal, yes, but in Lenny's mind, it was fair. It was a punishment that fit the crime. Years later, when Lenny wrote his autobiography and became a celebrity, stories like this were often romanticized. But we must remember the visceral reality of that sound, the snap of the bone. It serves as a reminder that the world Lenny inhabited was not a movie. It was a place of severe consequences. The smile became a trademark of sorts. In his acting career, famously in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, Lenny brought that same terrifying charisma to the screen. When he played Barry the Baptist and he threatened someone, the audience believed it because they knew it wasn't acting. They knew that the man on the screen had actually done these things. They knew that somewhere in London, there was a man who couldn't lift a cup of tea with his right arm because he once pulled a knife on the wrong person. Lenny McLean died in 1998, but stories like this ensure his immortality in the annals of true crime. They paint a portrait of a man who was the last of a dying breed, the bare-knuckle king who ruled by the strength of his arm and the iron of his will. The thug who pulled the knife learned the hardest lesson of his life that night. He learned that a weapon doesn't make you a man. He learned that intimidation only works on those who can feel fear. And he learned that when the giant smiles, it is not a sign of friendship. It is the baring of teeth before the bite. There is a deeper layer to this story that speaks to the social fabric of the time. The incident didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in a society where men felt abandoned by the state, where the police were viewed with suspicion, and where communities policed themselves. Lenny was a product of that environment. He was the chaotic solution to chaotic problems. In a world without order, people looked to strongmen to provide it. Lenny was the ultimate strongman. When he broke that man's arm, he wasn't just defending himself, he was reinforcing the order of the East End. He was stating that there are rules, and those rules are enforced by the Guv'nor. The snapping of the arm was the physical climax of the encounter, but the true victory was in the silence that followed. The silence of the pub, the silence of the streets, the silence of a reputation that needed no introduction. Lenny McLean didn't just break a bone that night, he broke the spirit of anyone in that room who ever thought about crossing him. He finished his pint, he went back to the door, and he stood watch over his kingdom, the undisputed, undefeated, and terrifying Guv'nor of the East End. The story serves as a chilling reminder of the rules of the concrete jungle. In a world of wolves, you do not flash your teeth at the lion. The man with the knife forgot his place in the food chain. He thought the blade gave him power. He was wrong. Power is not what you hold in your hand, it is what you hold in your heart. And Lenny McLean's heart was an engine of dominance that no knife could stop. As the years pass, the details might blur. The name of the pub might change in the retelling. The size of the knife might grow in the imagination. But two things remain constant in every version of the story: the smile that froze the blood, and the sound of the arm snapping like a dry twig in the dead of winter. It is the defining moment of a violent life, a snapshot of a time and place where justice was administered on the spot, without a judge, without a jury, just a man in a coat with a pint of bitter and a smile that meant the end of the world. Even today, walk into certain pubs in Bethnal Green or Hoxton, and you will find old men nursing drinks who remember that era. Ask them about Lenny McLean. They won't tell you about his movie roles or his books. They will look into the middle distance and tell you about the night the air in the room went cold. They will tell you about the night a fool pulled a knife. And they will tell you, with a shudder, about the sound of the snap. It is a sound that echoes through history, a testament to the man they called the Guv'nor.